Imagine you're reading a story, a biography really, and it's got all these incredible details about someone's birth, their life, their work, even their betrayal, and their very last words. Now, what if I told you that story was written down piece by piece over 1,000 years before the person was even born? That's the wild claim at the heart of the ancient Hebrew scriptures. Okay, let's dive into this.
So get this, the source material we're looking at today brings together over 300 distinct prophecies that many argue all point to a single identifiable historical figure. We're not talking about one or two lucky guesses here. We're talking about a massive body of text that creates what you could call a prophetic fingerprint.
So what exactly are we talking about here? Well, a messianic prophecy is basically a prediction from the Hebrew scriptures, what a lot of people call the Old Testament, that's later seen as being fulfilled by this promised figure, the Messiah. Now, for our purposes, we're simply going to look at what these texts actually say and the kind of blueprint they seem to lay out.
The story starts off incredibly broad, but then it narrows down with this amazing focus. This first set of prophecies, it's like a giant funnel. It starts with all of humanity and then just systematically tightens the search down to one specific family line.
This slide really shows that funnel effect perfectly. Look how it starts, super wide. The prophecy in Genesis says the Messiah will come from the seed of a woman, which is a pretty unique phrase, maybe hinting at a special kind of birth. Then, boom, the focus tightens to the descendants of Abraham. From there, it gets even narrower, down to just one of Abraham's 12 great-grandsons, Judah. And finally, it pinpoints one single family in that tribe, the royal line of King David. So the takeaway here is, before we even get any other details, the scriptures have already defined a very, very specific ancestry.
Okay, so the lineage is established. Now the prophetic lens zooms in even tighter. The blueprint starts to paint a picture of the Messiah's actual life, from the wild circumstances of his birth, all the way to the nature of his public ministry and his mission.
And the details here are just, wow, so specific. The prophet Micah, writing around 700 BC, names the tiny town of Bethlehem as the birthplace. Then you've got Isaiah predicting a virgin birth and that the child would be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. And Jeremiah talks about this great weeping, which is later seen as foretelling a horrible massacre of infants right around the time of the Messiah's arrival.
And after his birth, the prophecies don't just go quiet. Nope. The book of Isaiah actually pinpoints the geographical starting point of his public work. It says a great light would be seen in Galilee, an area that honestly was kind of looked down upon at the time.
So what would this ministry actually look like? Well, the scriptures basically laid out a job description centuries ahead of time. The Psalms predicted he'd teach in parables, these symbolic stories. Isaiah foretold a ministry of miraculous healing, the blind seeing, the deaf hearing. It also said he'd have this fiery passion for God's house, and that his core mission would be to preach good news.
And this one paints a picture of one of the most famous scenes. Just imagine a king arriving, not on some mighty warhorse, but on a humble donkey. Zechariah prophesied this exact moment, a moment of peaceful, humble triumph, which the New Testament records is being fulfilled when Jesus entered Jerusalem.
But then, the whole tone of the story shifts, and it shifts dramatically. This next cluster of prophecies, and it's maybe the most detailed of them all, paints a really dark, painful picture. It's a portrait of suffering, of betrayal, and ultimately of sacrifice.
The betrayal is foretold with, honestly, chilling accuracy. King David, in Psalm 41, writes about the sting of being turned on by a close, trusted friend. Then, hundreds of years later, the prophet Zechariah adds an even crazier detail. The exact price of that betrayal would be 30 pieces of silver.
And how would the Messiah react to all these false accusations? Well, Isaiah 53, which is a truly remarkable chapter, predicts he wouldn't even defend himself. It says, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth." Just a quiet dignity in the face of all that injustice was apparently part of the blueprint.
Okay, this slide is where things just get incredibly intense. This isn't just one prophecy. It's like a mosaic of details from all different sources. You've got Psalm 22, written 1,000 years before the Romans even invented crucifixion, describing the piercing of hands and feet and soldiers gambling for clothing. Another psalm mentions being given vinegar to drink. Zechariah talks about a nation looking on the one they pierced. And then there's this weirdly specific detail from another psalm, that not one of his bones would be broken, which was a key part of the Passover lamb symbolism.
And if that wasn't enough, the source material claims that even his final words from the cross were recorded centuries before he ever said them.
That agonizing cry, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's the very first line of Psalm 22. The final commitment of his spirit, that's in Psalm 31. And the declaration, it is finished, echoes the way Psalm 22 wraps up. It's just unbelievable.
The story of his suffering wraps up with one last specific detail. Even though he died the death of a criminal, the prophet Isaiah wrote that he would be assigned a grave with the wicked, but be with the rich in his death. But this story doesn't end in a tomb, not even close. The prophetic blueprint had a final climactic act written into it all along, a victory over death itself. This is the big turn from sacrifice to ultimate triumph.
And right here, this is the heart of that final act. This verse from Psalm 16 makes a direct prophecy that the Messiah's body would not decay in the grave, or Sheol as it's called here. This is seen as the foundational promise of the resurrection, the core idea that death would not get the final word.
So this victory is really a two-part finale. The prophet Hosea talks about ransoming people from the power of the grave, redeeming them from death. And then, after that, Psalm 68 describes an ascension, a triumphant return to heaven, which puts the cap on the Messiah's entire earthly journey just as it was foretold.
So as we can see on this chart, we've just traced this incredible prophetic arc. It starts super broad with lineage, then zooms right into the nitty-gritty of birth and ministry, moves through that detailed portrait of suffering and sacrifice, and then culminates in the ultimate victory over death. It's a complete story, just told in advance.
And all of this leaves us with one final big question to think about. I mean, no matter what you believe, what's the impact of a story like this being told in such incredible detail, so far in advance? What does it mean when a blueprint seems to exist for a life that was lived centuries later? It's a question that has fascinated thinkers, scholars, and believers for thousands of years.